John Carter awoke with the kind of jolt you only get when a dream is too real, or when it isn't a dream at all. One moment he was in his lab, hunched over a microscope, muttering curses about funding cuts. The next, he was lying flat on his back on what felt like grass but looked like green digital static. "Okay, John," he muttered to himself, blinking at a sun that seemed too bright and too sharp. "Either you've discovered the world's first VR hangover, or someone slipped something into your coffee. Let's hope it's option A." He sat up slowly, taking in his surroundings. His childhood neighborhood stretched out before him, but it wasn't right. The houses were there, his house, the Smiths' house with their tacky flamingo lawn ornaments, but they shimmered, like they were made of light and data instead of bricks and wood. Even the sky felt off, flickering faintly at the edges like a bad video game render. John's scientist brain kicked in, cataloging the inconsistencies. The smell of flowers was too strong, like someone had dumped an entire bottle of floral air freshener over the place. The birdsong was oddly repetitive, like a sound file on a loop. And then there were the flowers in his mother's garden, vivid blue roses with leaves that twitched like antennae. He reached out cautiously to touch one. The petals curled inward with a soft hiss, revealing tiny, needle-like teeth. Jesus! He scrambled back, clutching his hand. The flower hissed again, as if to say, "Yeah, that's right. Keep your distance." It was then he noticed something even stranger. His hand wasn't quite normal. His skin seemed to glow faintly, a soft bioluminescent green, and when he moved his fingers, faint trails of light followed. It wasn't painful, just unnerving, like his body had been upgraded without his permission. "Great," John muttered, inspecting his hand. "Now I'm radioactive. Just what I needed." Before he could spiral into full-blown panic, a voice chirped behind him, well, look who finally woke up. Took you long enough." John spun around, ready to demand answers, only to find himself face to beak with a talking bird. A parrot, to be precise, but unlike any parrot he'd ever seen. Its feathers shimmered with metallic hues, and its eyes glowed like tiny LEDs. "What the hell are you?" John demanded. The bird cocked its head. "Rude. I'm Darwin, your guide to this delightful little hellscape you've stumbled into." "Hellscape?" John repeated, his brain struggling to keep up. "What are you talking about? Where am I?" "Gene World," Darwin said matter-of-factly, hopping closer. "You're inside a simulation built from DNA algorithms. Think of it like nature's version of Minecraft, but with fewer pickaxes and more existential crises." John stared at him. "You're telling me I'm in a video game made of genes?" Darwin's beak clicked. "Not a video game, genius. A simulation. There's a difference. But yes, you're stuck here, and unless you want to become permanent data fodder, you'll need to evolve your way out." "Evolve?" "Yeah, you know, Darwinism. Survival of the fittest. Except here, it's a little more literal." The bird flapped its wings, gesturing at the shimmering landscape. "This whole place reacts to you. Change yourself, and the world changes with you. But be careful, too many changes, and you might not like what you become." John opened his mouth to argue, but Darwin cut him off. "Oh, and one more thing," the bird added cheerfully. "You're on a timer. So, better get moving." "Timer for what?" John snapped, but Darwin didn't answer. Instead, the bird launched itself into the air with a mechanical whir, leaving John alone in the flickering, half-real world. John wandered cautiously through the neighborhood, trying to piece together what was happening. If this was a simulation, it was absurdly detailed. He could feel the grass under his feet, hear the wind rustling through the digital trees. But every now and then, something glitched, a flower morphing into a different shape, a tree flickering out of existence and reappearing as a cactus. As he walked, a floating holographic interface appeared before him, startling him so badly he nearly fell over. "Welcome, John Carter. Gene World 1.0 initializing. Your survival determines reality." Great. Cryptic and terrifying, John muttered. Just what I needed. The interface shifted, displaying a list of objectives. The first one read, Adapt to survive, find the mutation pool. What the hell is a mutation pool? John asked aloud. As if in answer, the ground beneath his feet rumbled. A fissure opened up in the road ahead, revealing a glowing, pulsating pool of liquid. It looked like molten gold mixed with strands of DNA, swirling and churning as if alive. Of course, John said. Because why wouldn't I jump into the glowing puddle of genetic soup? That's definitely a normal, rational thing to do. Despite his sarcasm, he knew he didn't have a choice. The world was shifting around him, growing darker and more unstable. The edges of his vision shimmered with static, and he had the distinct feeling that standing still wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the mutation pool. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. The liquid wasn't hot or cold, it was something else entirely, a pulsing energy that surged through his body like an electric current. He felt his DNA twisting, reshaping itself in ways he couldn't comprehend. When he emerged, gasping for air, he noticed the changes immediately. His hands were different, sleek and webbed, with a faint iridescent sheen. He flexed his fingers experimentally, marveling at how natural the new appendages felt. Neat, he said, holding them up to the light. But also deeply unsettling. A loud roar interrupted his self-assessment. Turning, he saw a massive creature lumbering toward him, a grotesque fusion of reptile and machine, its body bristling with metallic scales and glowing red eyes. Fantastic, John muttered, backing away. Because this day wasn't weird enough already. Darwin reappeared, swooping down to perch on a nearby tree. Looks like you've got company, the bird said, sounding far too cheerful. What do I do? John yelled. Adapt, Darwin called back. Before taking off again, John didn't have time to argue. The creature charged, its metal claws tearing through the ground like butter. Acting on instinct, John dove into a nearby river, and immediately felt his body change again. This time, the sensation was smoother, less jarring. His new webbed hands propelled him through the water with ease, and he realized he could breathe underwater. Gills had formed along his neck, filtering the oxygen from the liquid around him. The creature hesitated at the water's edge, snarling in frustration. It wasn't built for swimming, and John took full advantage, putting as much distance as he could between himself and his pursuer. When he finally surfaced, he was in a completely different environment. The neighborhood was gone, replaced by a lush, swamp-like jungle teeming with strange, amphibian creatures. Guess I'm not in Kansas anymore, John muttered. The jungle was alive in ways that made John's skin crawl. Plants shifted and swayed, almost as if watching him. Insects buzzed around him, their wings leaving trails of light in the air. Okay, John, he said to himself. Step 1, don't get eaten. Step 2, figure out how to get out of here before you turn into a fish permanently. As he trudged through the swamp, Darwin reappeared, landing on his shoulder. Not bad, the bird said, eyeing John's gills. You're a quick learner. Yeah, well, I'm also a little tired of being hunted by giant murder machines, John snapped. Darwin chuckled. Get used to it. This place doesn't pull punches. But hey, look on the bright side, you're still alive. For now. Comforting, John muttered. Ahead, he spotted a strange structure, an ancient-looking temple overgrown with vines. The holographic interface appeared again, displaying a new message. Objective, solve the gene puzzle. Gene puzzle? John asked. What does that even mean? Darwin grinned. Oh, you're gonna love this one. With no other options, John stepped into the temple, bracing himself for whatever fresh madness awaited him. The temple's interior was damp and cool, with an odd bioluminescent glow emanating from the walls. The architecture was a strange mix of ancient and futuristic, as if someone had taken Mayan ruins and jammed them into a high-tech lab. The air smelled faintly of ozone and wet earth, and John's webbed feet squished uncomfortably with each step. Darwin flitted ahead, his metallic feathers glinting in the soft light. Ah, the temple of sequencing. Classic Gene World Challenge. You'll like this one. John eyed him warily. That's your version of encouragement? What's next, telling me it's not that deadly? Darwin cocked his head. Well, it's not lethal, exactly. At least not if you're quick on your feet. Or fins. Or whatever it is you've got now. Great. John sighed and took another step forward. As he did, the room lit up, revealing a series of panels on the floor. Each panel had a glowing symbol on it, double helices, chromosomes, and other genetic icons he vaguely recognized from his lab work. Before he could even process what it all meant, a deep, resonant voice boomed from nowhere. To progress, complete the sequence. Oh, fantastic. I love disembodied voices, John muttered. What's the catch? Darwin fluttered down to perch on a nearby stone ledge. No catch. Just don't screw it up. Every wrong step, well, you'll see. John scowled at him. Care to elaborate? The parrot just chuckled. You'll figure it out. You're supposed to be a genius, right? Ignoring Darwin, John focused on the panels. The symbols seemed to form a pattern, but it wasn't immediately clear what he was supposed to do. He crouched down, running his fingers over the nearest panel, and noticed a faint vibration beneath his touch. Complete the sequence, he murmured to himself, thinking back to his genetics training. If this place was truly built on DNA algorithms, then maybe. He stepped cautiously onto the panel marked with a double helix. Nothing happened. Encouraged, he moved to the next panel in what he guessed was a logical progression, a pair of chromosomes. The floor beneath him rumbled softly, and for a moment, he thought he'd chosen correctly. Then the entire room shuddered violently. The glowing panels flared red, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a swarm of mechanical creatures, spidery things with glowing eyes and razor-sharp legs. Oh, come on. John shouted, leaping backward as the first spider lunged at him. He swatted it away, but another one was already skittering toward him. Their movements were unnervingly fast, and their legs made a horrible scraping sound against the stone floor. Wrong step, Darwin called helpfully. Try again. No kidding. John yelled back, dodging another attack. One of the spiders nicked his arm, and he felt a burning sensation as its metallic claw cut through his skin. Desperate, he dove for the mutation pool at the center of the room. Unlike the one outside, this one was smaller, almost like a fountain. Without hesitation, he plunged his hands into the glowing liquid, feeling that now familiar surge of energy as his DNA shifted and morphed. When he pulled his hands out, they were different. His fingers had elongated slightly, and his nails had hardened into sharp, claw-like tips. His skin shimmered with a faintly metallic sheen, and he felt an odd sense of agility coursing through his body. Time to test this out, he muttered, turning back to face the spiders. The changes worked almost instinctively. He moved faster than before, darting around the mechanical creatures with a speed and precision he didn't know he had. His claws tore through their bodies like they were made of paper, and within moments, the swarm was reduced to a pile of sparking metal scraps. Breathing heavily, he turned back to the panels. The glow had returned to its original soft blue, as if daring him to try again. Okay, he said, wiping sweat, or whatever his new body produced, from his brow. Let's not mess this up a second time. He studied the symbols more carefully, his scientific mind kicking into high gear. The sequence wasn't random, it was following the basic structure of genetic replication. He stepped onto the double helix again, then the chromosomes. This time, he moved to the codon symbol, and finally to an icon that looked like a spliced gene. The room vibrated again, but this time it wasn't an alarm. The panels lit up in a warm green glow, and the disembodied voice returned. Sequence complete. Evolutionary path unlocked. A section of the far wall slid open, revealing a new pathway. Darwin fluttered over, looking smug. See? I knew you'd figure it out. Yeah, after nearly getting skewered, John grumbled. He glanced at his hands, flexing his newly sharpened claws. "And what the hell is this? Am I even human anymore?" The bird tilted his head. Close enough. You're alive, aren't you? That's what matters." "Sure," John muttered, stepping into the newly opened corridor. "Just keep telling myself that." The corridor led to a vast jungle, even denser than the swamp he'd passed through earlier. The air was thick with humidity, and the ground squelched beneath his feet. Strange creatures moved through the trees, some resembling oversized lizards, others like birds with shimmering, featherless wings. John's enhancements seemed to help him navigate the terrain. His claws dug into the wet ground, giving him traction, and his increased agility allowed him to dodge the occasional predator that came too close. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was losing himself, piece by piece. With every adaptation, Darwin, ever unhelpful, flitted along beside him. "So, how are you feeling?" "Like a science experiment gone wrong," John snapped. "Seriously, how do I even know what's real anymore? What if this whole thing is just some elaborate hallucination?" The bird shrugged, or at least, it looked like a shrug. "Does it matter? Real or not, you've got to survive. Isn't that what life's all about?" "Deep," John said dryly. "Next, you'll be quoting Nietzsche." Darwin ignored him, darting ahead to scout the path. "Heads up," he called back. "Looks like you've got another obstacle." John groaned. "Of course I do. Why would anything be easy?" The obstacle was a massive chasm, at least 50 feet wide, with no visible way across. A faint mist rose from its depths, obscuring whatever lay below. On the far side, John could just make out a glowing structure, a pedestal with another mutation pool and what looked like a key-shaped object hovering above it. "Let me guess," he said. "I need that key to move on." Darwin landed on a nearby branch. "Bingo. But unless you've suddenly learned how to fly, you might want to get creative." John scanned the area, his mind racing. He spotted a cluster of vines hanging from a tree near the edge of the chasm. They looked sturdy enough, but he'd need something more to make the jump. With a resigned sigh, he plunged his hands into the nearest mutation pool. The now familiar rush of energy hit him, and when he pulled his hands out, they were different yet again. His arms had elongated slightly, and his fingers were now tipped with small, suction-like pads. "Great," he muttered. "Now I'm part tree frog." Ignoring the existential dread bubbling in the back of his mind, he grabbed hold of the vines and swung across the chasm. His new limbs made it easy to grip the slick surface, and he landed on the far side with surprising grace. Darwin let out an impressed whistle. "Not bad, frogman." John ignored him, approaching the pedestal. The key-shaped object hovered just above the mutation pool, glowing softly. He reached out to grab it, but as soon as his fingers brushed the surface, the ground beneath him rumbled. "Oh, come on," he shouted, spinning around just in time to see another swarm of creatures emerging from the jungle. These ones were larger than the spiders, wolf-like beasts with glowing eyes and metallic jaws. Darwin squawked. "Better move fast, buddy. Those guys don't look friendly." "No kidding." John yelled, snatching the key and bolting back toward the chasm. The creatures were faster than he expected, their metallic limbs propelling them forward with terrifying speed. He barely made it to the vines before the first one lunged at him, its jaws snapping shut inches from his leg. Swinging back across the chasm, he turned just in time to see one of the creatures attempt to follow him. It didn't make it. The vine snapped under its weight, and it plunged into the misty depths below. John didn't stop to watch. He ran back into the jungle, clutching the key tightly in his clawed hand. For now, he'd survived. But the deeper he went into Gene World, the more he wondered if survival alone would be enough. John pushed forward through the dense jungle, his heart pounding as the eerie howls of the metallic wolves faded behind him. His muscles burned from the frantic swing across the chasm, and his claws, though effective, felt foreign. Every step he took reminded him of how far removed from normal he'd become. The glow of the key in his hand pulsed faintly, casting rhythmic flashes of light over the glistening leaves and phosphorescent fungi. Darwin landed on his shoulder, seemingly unfazed by their latest brush with death. Well, that was exciting. Nothing like a little chase to get the blood pumping. Shut up, Darwin, John muttered, glaring at the bird. Why didn't you warn me about the wolves? You were supposed to be scouting. Darwin fluffed his feathers. Scout, guide, comic relief, I can't be everything at once. Besides, you handled it. Mostly. John resisted the urge to swat him off his shoulder. Instead, he focused on the path ahead, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The jungle had begun to thin, and the oppressive heat gave way to a cooler, almost sterile atmosphere. The trees were replaced by tall, spindly structures that resembled crystalline towers, their surfaces reflecting the faint glow of the key in his hand. Where am I now? He asked, more to himself than to Darwin. This is the transition zone, Darwin replied, hopping down to a nearby rock. You're getting closer to the core. And what happens when I get there? Darwin tilted his head, as if debating how much to tell him. Let's just say the core is where things get interesting. Define interesting, John said, narrowing his eyes, but Darwin didn't answer. Instead, he flapped his wings and took off again, leaving John to follow the faintly glowing path ahead. The transition zone was eerily quiet. The crystalline structures emitted a soft hum, and every now and then, John thought he saw shadows moving within them. He tried to ignore the unsettling sensation that he was being watched. The key in his hand felt warm, its glow intensifying as he approached what appeared to be a massive, shimmering dome in the distance. The dome's surface rippled like liquid, reflecting the surroundings in distorted waves. It was unlike anything John had seen in Gene-World so far, and that was saying something. As he drew closer, the key in his hand vibrated, pulling him forward. This has to be it, he muttered, stepping up to the dome. The key glowed brighter, and without thinking, he pressed it against the shimmering surface. The dome parted like water, allowing him to step through. Inside, the air was cool and filled with a faint, electric buzz. The space was vast and circular, with a single structure in the center, a massive pillar that pulsed with light. The walls of the dome displayed shifting images, like 1,000 screens playing different scenes at once. He saw glimpses of other environments, deserts, oceans, and frozen tundras, all teeming with strange, evolving creatures. Welcome to the core, Darwin said, suddenly appearing beside him. This is the heart of Gene-World. John approached the pillar cautiously. It radiated a strange energy that made his skin tingle. So, what am I supposed to do here? Find the exit, Gene, Darwin replied. It's the only way out. John glanced at him. And where exactly is this exit, Gene? Darwin's eyes glowed faintly. That's the fun part. It's not a where. It's a what. Before John could ask for clarification, the pillar flared with light. A voice boomed through the dome, deep and resonant. Final test initiating. The ground beneath John's feet shifted, and the space around him transformed. The dome faded away, replaced by a vast, barren landscape under a stormy sky. The pillar remained, but now it was surrounded by towering obelisks, each etched with strange symbols. In the distance, a massive figure emerged from the shadows, a humanoid form, but larger than any human, its body shifting and morphing with each step. What the hell is that? John asked, his voice shaking. That, Darwin said grimly, is the Hive King. The figure moved closer, its glowing eyes locked on John. Its body was a chaotic blend of organic and mechanical parts, constantly rearranging itself as if it couldn't decide on a final form. When it spoke, its voice was a cacophony of overlapping tones. John Carter. You are unworthy of escape. Great, John muttered. A boss fight. Just what I needed. The Hive King raised one massive arm, and the ground around John erupted in a cascade of jagged spikes. He dodged, narrowly avoiding being impaled, and tried to assess his options. The mutation pool from earlier had vanished, and his current adaptations felt woefully inadequate against a creature this powerful. "Darwin," he shouted. "Any advice?" "Don't die," the bird offered unhelpfully. John glared at him but didn't have time to retort. The Hive King charged, its massive form barreling toward him with alarming speed. John leapt out of the way, his enhanced reflexes barely keeping him alive. He slashed at the creature with his claws, but they glanced off its metallic surface without leaving a mark. "Fantastic," he muttered. "I'm fighting a DNA tank." The Hive King turned, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You cannot win," it intoned. "Surrender, and your suffering will end." "Tempting offer," John said, backing away. "But I think I'll pass." The creature lunged again, and this time, John barely avoided its grasp. As he stumbled, his eyes landed on one of the obelisks surrounding the pillar. The symbols etched into its surface pulsed faintly, and he had a sudden realization. "Darwin," he yelled. "What are these things?" The bird darted down, landing on his shoulder. "Power nodes. They stabilize the core." John's mind raced. If they stabilize the core, then destabilizing them might just level the playing field. Darwin finished, his tone approving. "Now you're thinking." John didn't waste another second. He sprinted toward the nearest obelisk, dodging the Hive King's attacks as he went. The symbols on the obelisk glowed brighter as he approached, and he reached out, his clawed hand pressing against the surface. The obelisk pulsed once, then shattered into a burst of light. The Hive King roared, its body convulsing as the ground beneath it shifted. For a moment, its form flickered, as if struggling to maintain its shape. "Nice." Darwin squawked. "One down, 3 to go." John didn't need further encouragement. He darted to the next obelisk, using his agility to stay ahead of the Hive King's relentless pursuit. The second obelisk shattered just as easily as the first, sending another surge of energy rippling through the battlefield. The Hive King howled, its voice a chaotic blend of rage and pain. Its form grew more erratic, its limbs elongating and twisting unnaturally. "You will not escape," it bellowed. "Watch me," John shot back, diving for the third obelisk. The battle became a blur of movement and light. John's body ached with every step, but adrenaline and sheer determination kept him going. He shattered the third obelisk, then the fourth, each one sending shockwaves through the core. When the final obelisk fell, the Hive King let out a deafening scream. Its body collapsed in on itself, imploding into a vortex of light. The ground beneath John trembled, and the stormy sky above began to dissolve. As the Hive King disappeared, the pillar in the center of the battlefield flared with blinding light. A single glowing strand of DNA emerged, hovering in the air before him. "The exit gene," Darwin said, his voice soft with awe. "You did it." John stared at the glowing strand, his heart pounding. He reached out and grasped it, feeling a surge of energy unlike anything he'd experienced before. The world around him dissolved into light, and he felt himself being pulled upward, back toward reality. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the lab. The glowing strand of DNA was gone, but the memories of Gene World lingered, vivid and unsettling. He looked down at his hands, relieved to see they were human again, but as he stood there, catching his breath, he noticed something on the edge of his desk, a small, glowing module. It pulsed faintly, the same rhythm as the exit gene. John picked it up, his mind racing. He didn't know what Genevieve had planned for Gene World, but he wasn't about to let them exploit it unchecked. "Game on," he muttered.